次の聖者に意味を託す。それこそ唯一この残酷な世界に抗う術なのだ。兵士を怒る、兵士を叫ぶ、兵士を叩け。
This has always been a topic of interest among the Attack on Titan fandom, and now that we have seen the climax of the series play out, let's talk about this what-if scenario. As you already know, the timeline of Attack on Titan has always been fixed, and Aaron's as well as everyone else's fate was sealed the moment the story began. That's why we'll consider a hypothetical scenario and see if the events that unfolded after the Battle of Shinigashina could have unfolded differently. With that said, let's talk about it. The decision of who will ultimately inherit the Colossal Titan was in Levi's hand, and he already had made up his mind that it should be Erwin, but he changed his mind at the last moment and ended up choosing Armin. From there on out, Armin had the unspoken responsibility of leading humanity as a leader. However, his role in the story was still a bit anticlimactic. He was anxious at the mere thought of rumbling, and yet he had never had any plausible options to talk about. Armin's way of thinking had become unstable. Eren was able to talk him into submission, and it wasn't until the end of the story that he finally had become a major influence on the outcome. But this would never have happened if it was Erwin. To start things off, the Jaegerists as we know them wouldn't have existed. Flock wouldn't have gathered them because Erwin would have been there. In his eyes, Erwin was the devil who would ultimately lead the humans to victory. However, Erwin never lasted, so he chose to follow Eren, who sort of resembled the persona of the devil Flock saw in Erwin. It goes without saying that Erwin's charisma in the series has always been unsurpassed. He is a man capable of making the best out of any possible situation. Things like hesitance, denial, fear, and anxiety that held both Hanji and Armin back aren't enough to make him flinch. So if the commander remained Erwin, he would have kept the rebellion under check, kept an eye on the volunteers, and made sure that the military doesn't become unstable. And of course, Eren would never have been able to talk down to Erwin. In fact, that whole confrontation would have played out differently. If the attack on Marley really did happen, and the scouts managed to retrieve Eren and put him in a cell while Levi watched over Zeke, then Erwin wouldn't have approached the conversation like Hanji in that situation. She tried to provoke the emotionally unstable Eren into spitting out his plan, but failed.
当然思想を持つ俺を殺すこともできない。いくら脅したところでジークを殺すわけにもいかない。つまり、ハンジさん、あなたに何ができるって言うんですか。教えてくださいよ、ハンジさん。他のやり方があったら教えてくださいよ。
On the other hand, Erwin would have put Eren under extreme restrictions so that he becomes incapable of using his Warhammer Titan's abilities to escape. But even if Erwin remained unaware of the Warhammer Titan's abilities and Eren somehow managed to escape, there would be no strong faction like the Jaegerists waiting for his arrival. Meanwhile, Zeke would have remained in check and he wouldn't have any crazy cards to play, like turning the soldiers in the forest into Titans. If he tried anything funny, Captain Levi would have chopped him up and then fed him to one of the soldiers in the forest. But all of this will only take place if we consider the hypothetical scenario that the attack on Marley takes place exactly as it's actually happened. However, if the commander remained Erwin, the attack may never have happened. Flock wouldn't have devised a plan that would make it so Eren and Yelena can meet. And of course, Yelena wouldn't have been able to outsmart Erwin to begin with. Zeke's plan may be taken into consideration, considering how it would have been eventually brought up, but Erwin wouldn't have stopped at just this plan. Because unlike Zeke, who deemed life unworthy of any significance, Erwin was the man who always sought out to understand more about the world. Hanji would be focusing on the stuff that she excels at, and the technological advancement would have continued at a faster rate. Now, let's consider how Eren's stance would have been. Surely, the overwhelming amount of memories in his head would have been different because if there's no Armin, how can he see glimpses of such memories, where Armin is talking with Zeke and all? Of course, he wouldn't. In fact, the timeline would have been completely changed, and Eren would be seeing a different future. It may still have been something he didn't like, but now with Erwin on humanity's side, the things he had to do will definitely change. Either he will see himself dying all the while by getting eaten by another Eldian because he refused to elaborate when Erwin asked him questions and continued to show extreme violent tendencies. Yes, and he would have accepted that fact. The only reason Eren turned out to be the way he was ultimately because that was the only future he could visualize, and for that reason, he always had to follow through with specific instances just as they unfolded in his memory. But then again, if we look too much into it, Eren's mother may not have died the way she did. Bertolt may have been eaten by Dina, and she would have become a colossal titan. So what if that happened and both Grisha and Dina united? Marley's plan would have ended in failure, and both Reiner and Annie would have been apprehended. So if that became the case, would Eren still inherit the two titans? Yes, of course, because Grisha meant it to show him the secrets in the basement, and knowing Eren, he would have inherited his father's will without thinking twice. Erwin would have taken all of this into account, as this incident wouldn't go unnoticed. And for Marley, who had to suffer a major loss, the situation would have been terrible. On the other hand, both Erwin and Hanji would have used this knowledge to establish the island as a nation that is on par with other nations, all the while using Titan hardening and modern technology to create devastating weapons. And the scouts would have exterminated the Titans outside Shinigashina. But even hypothetical as it is, the notion that Attack on Titan has a fixed timeline keeps creating many paradoxes, the moment you consider these alternate possibilities. Would Eren have been there to convince his father to kill the royal family? These kinds of questions keep rising. However, if there's one thing I can confidently say, it is that even if things continue to play as they did in the actual story, Erwin would never have accepted rumbling as their ultimate solution. Honestly, even if he isn't able to form a peace treaty with the world, he would have been able to come to terms, and Eren could have ended the curse, though we still don't know how Eren ended the curse exactly. So this one is a bit too far-fetched, especially when you consider how Mikasa played some kind of role in it. But this instills the idea that however convenient rumbling may seem, if Erwin was the one who inherited the Colossal Titan, Eren's future memories would have been overwritten with a future that is influenced by Erwin. Honestly, Eren would cooperate with Erwin instead of refusing to elaborate. Erwin would have devised a plan to deal with the world, while Eren may have ended the curse together with Mikasa, in turn freeing the world of Titans. He-Zero may play a huge part in its allied nation. As for Zeke, he would have been reduced to a side character in all of this because he wouldn't have any cards to play. The racism against the Eldians would never end, but because the major enemies had always been Marleyans, and the very reason they came to the island in the first place was to retrieve the Founding Titan, most of the reasoning for another war will be lost. So by allying with Hizuru, Paradise may establish itself as an isolate nation. Be that as it may, all of these are just hypothetical situations. The world of Attack on Titan always had a fixed timeline, not to mention Erwin's character arc ended perfectly. Still, it is always fun to talk about such things, so if you have any other thoughts popping in your head, go wild in the comments section. Press that like button if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel if you are interested in more videos like this one. Well then, I'll see you guys in my next video.